All right, everyone, this is Mr. Vanderpool, and we're moving on to our third lesson here. We're going to be focusing in on individual markets, so markets in the microeconomic sense. And every market is going to have two parts to it. You're going to have the buyer side, which is the demand side of a market. And you're going to have the seller side, which is the supply side of the market. And today, our focus is going to be on the buyer side, or the demand side of the market. And we're going to talk about things like the law of demand, and we're going to look at some graphical representations of the law of demand. So let's start off by talking about the law of demand. So the law of demand states this, that all else being equal, remember that's called the ceteris paribus assumption, as price falls, the quantity demanded rises. Notice I did not say the demand rises. As price falls, the quantity demanded rises. There's a difference between demand and quantity demanded. Price affects quantity demanded. I know that sounds picky, but nevertheless, remember, price affects quantity demanded. So as price falls, the quantity demanded rises, and as the price rises, the quantity demanded falls. This makes a lot of intuitive sense, in the sense that if the prices fall, people are going to buy more. If things become more expensive, people are going to buy less. Okay, this makes a lot of sense just from us buying things day to day. We're going to buy more things if they're less expensive than if they are more expensive. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and use a chart to reflect this law of demand. And so this is called a demand schedule. So we're going to have our price, which is represented by the variable P, and then we're going to have quantity demanded, which we're going to represent by the variable QD. So we're going to start off, let's say we're looking at hammers. All right, so we start off with $9 a hammer. At $9 a hammer, you're going to have 2 hammers demanded. At $8 a hammer, you have 3 hammers demanded. $7 a hammer, 5 demanded. And at $6 a hammer, you have 9 demanded. Notice here, we have a numerical representation of the law of demand because as price is going down, quantity demanded is going up. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and basically graph that chart right there. So, and then that will construct a demand curve. So what we're going to do is on our y-axis, we're going to have price, which we're going to represent by the variable P. Price is always going to be on our y-axis when we're looking at a demand graph here. You're going to have quantity, okay, which is going to be on your x-axis, and it's always going to be on your x-axis. And then we're going to go ahead and graph these points. So $9, we have 2 demanded. $8, we have 3 demanded, etc., etc. And we draw a smooth curve through them. And we have our demand curve, which is represented by the variable D. Demand curves are always going to be downward sloping as you go left to right. The way I remember that, demand and down both start with D. Okay, so demand is always going to go down as you go left to right. And the reason is because as price falls, quantity demanded goes up. So there's this inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. As price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. And whenever you have that inverse relationship, you're actually going to have a downward sloping graph here. So demand curves are always going to be downward sloping. So when we're talking about demand, we're talking about the entire curve. So factors other than price will change demand and will actually move the demand curve. When we're talking about quantity demanded, we're talking about just a point on the curve. When price changes, then you have a change in quantity demanded. So as price changes, you're just moving from point to point to point to point on your demand curve. So that's important to remember. Price changes quantity demanded. Demand is changed by factors other than price. So to be on the demand curve, a person must be willing and able to purchase the product or service. All right, so notice here we already talked about this, but there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity, and that causes the demand curve to be downward sloping as you go left to right. Now, let's talk about some definitions. So quantity demanded, that is the amount that will be purchased at a specific price. Changes in price are going to change quantity demanded and are going to move you from point to point on the demand curve. We're talking about demand. We're talking about the entire schedule of quantities of goods and services that will be purchased at various possible prices at a specified time. All other things being constant. So factors other than price are going to change demand, and that actually ends up shifting the entire demand curve. So always remember, ladies and gentlemen, price changes quantity demanded. Price does not change demand. Factors other than price change demand. Only one variable will change quantity demanded. That variable is price, and as price changes, you're moving along from point to point on that demand curve. Price does not change. That triangle means change, it's delta. Price does not change demand. Factors other than price change demand. So you might ask yourself, what are these factors other than price that change demand? Well, that is what we are going to look at next.